NetSuite allows you to have as many sandboxes as you want, and you can push that production refresh to those sandboxes. And that way you can test new solutions. So those workflows you create, you could test those in the sandbox before you push them to production. That would be really helpful to use that sandbox for that capability.
Welcome to the AI in Accounting podcast. Now, here's your host, Joshua Feinberg of Vic.ai.
Hi, I'm Joshua Feinberg from the AI in Accounting podcast, and I'm being joined today by Daphne Peterson, who's a supervisor at RSM U.S. Welcome, Daphne.
Thank you, Joshua, for the opportunity today. I really appreciate it.
And thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast today and talk to our viewers, talk to our listeners about your favorite tips around NetSuite. But before we do that, when I start these interviews, I usually like to learn a little bit more about you. I'd like to learn a bit more about where you went to school, how your career progression has been, how you ended up in your current role at RSM US, how your team fits in with the bigger picture at RSM US. Can you give our viewers, give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. I've had about 20 plus years of accounting, finance, and operations. A lot of my background's been working for Fortune 500 companies, and I decided to go into consulting just because I wanted to do more advisory work and consulting. My last 9 years have been SaaS-based, using Oracle, NetSuite, and some QuickBooks. But basically it's been focused on accounting and operations, which I find has been really helpful understanding the operations of my clients.
You know, one of the interesting things that I found out when I've interviewed a lot of other experts for software is kind of the moment that they knew when they wanted to go into accounting software. Was ever like a big light bulb moment when you were growing up? Was there something that happened as a kid or in college or something where you said, this is my calling, or it just kind of happened by accident?
You know, my father was a CPA, so I just kind of grew up with accounting from a very early age, and then it just kind of morphed into management. I have a management background, so I manage large teams, so it's kind of morphed into consulting. So I think taking that experience from all those years and then just being able to advise these clients now is really rewarding. So it's just morphed. I can't tell you the exact moment it happened, but it just evolved over many years.
How did you originally come to NetSuite? Was it an employer where you got there and they were already using it? Was they looking for a volunteer to get trained on it initially?
So what happened was I was at a client and they were looking at an acquisition. And we had a great support team for NetSuite from this company called Explore Consulting. And as we sold the company and I found myself looking for employment, I reached out to Explore Consulting and they hired me. And I was really excited because that's all they did was NetSuite implementations. And then about 8 months later, we were acquired by RSM US, which is now the largest NetSuite provider. And they have 15 international company contacts. We have RSM offices that handle 15 international companies. So it was really exciting going to Explore because they were the NetSuite provider. But at the same time, when we were acquired, it was even more exciting because that then became the largest NetSuite provider. So I've just stayed in NetSuite the last 3 years. But I was a NetSuite user, and I had great support. So then I wanted to be a NetSuite consultant because of that.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I was telling you about that before we started the podcast today. I've seen that come up a number of times where somebody kind of fell into it by accident in a previous job where maybe they were spending 20, 30, 40% of their week on a particular mid-market ERP platform, but they loved it so much that they decided to, instead of just using it in one particular role, they wanted to help lots of different companies with lots of different implementations.
Right, and I've used PeopleSoft, SAP, and NetSuite has been the best for me as a user. It's been more easily understood for me, and I just kind of latched onto it and enjoyed it.
So if you were sitting down and having coffee or a virtual coffee in these times with somebody that's brand new to NetSuite, either that joined your team at RSM US, or maybe it's a new client that you're working with that has a little bit of concern because maybe they've worked with another accounting package or another ERP package, and they said, Daphne, like, what would you tell me to get started? What would you tell a beginner that you think is especially important for them to know when they're first getting started with NetSuite?
So the first thing I would do is I would really understand your homepage, your dashboard, because that's where you can create shortcuts, KPIs, reminders to help you do your job. So that's the first place I would go as a first time, beginning user, so that dashboard helped me drive my processes throughout the month. So if you're an accountant and you're closing the month end, you can have all these reminders to remind you the steps, understanding that NetSuite has a month end process, but there's certain things outside the month end process that you would want to be reminded to use. So one of those tips would be use your dashboards, KPI shortcuts, and reminders.
Is that something? Oh,
yep,
good.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is that something you normally cover during onboarding?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can build on that once you understand the basics. You can build on that and create searches, and you can provide links to pages that you frequently use. So those are your shortcuts. That would be really helpful for a beginning user, even though the dashboard at first looks a little scary. Just getting those 3 key basic things would really help drive efficiencies for that user.
Cool. Anything else that you think would be especially relevant for someone that's just getting started?
So Suite Answers. I still use Suite Answers. You can go to Help and then Suite Answers, and it provides you in-depth steps to complete certain tasks. It provides you you can put an error message in there, and it tells you what the error message is. Suite Answers is like the encyclopedia to NetSuite. It's very super helpful. Also, your help fields on your transaction forms. If you're navigating to a particular field and you're not quite sure what it is, clicking that field help gives you quick help navigation, or you can hit help and it takes you to a more in-depth page to understand what that field means. I have one more tip.
Yeah, go right ahead. Yep.
If you're using a sandbox, pardon?
Dashboards, KPIs, reminders, all very closely related, and then the help knowing where to look for help, and then third tip for beginners.
Yes, and then color code your environment. So if you have a sandbox environment that you practice things in, and then you have your production environment, I like to color code my sandbox orange, so I know right when I'm in that test environment, and then my production's always another color, so it kind of keeps my memory, triggers my memory when I'm in a certain environment, production environment. I also like to use the drag and drop feature. You can pull files from your desktop and drag them into the transaction form, and it will actually file that document in the file cabinet in NetSuite, and it creates more efficiency when you're wanting to attach a document to that transaction form.
So color coding will help you keep track better whether you're using a test or production environment, and then drag and drop can be helpful with forms?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And filing those forms in the file cabinet and attaching them to that transaction record, that drag and drop.
Is that something where you'd see a lot of beginners struggle with early on, with being able to organize their files and structures and naming conventions?
What we have them do is organize their file structure as we're implementing, and then the drag and drop feature, when you drag it to that form, it knows which file cabinet to put it in, and it would also just attach it to that actual transaction record. Yeah,
that imagine is really key to getting off on the right foot, is being able to think all of that through during onboarding.
Right.
Otherwise you end up with tortured coworkers down the road who can't figure out where to turn.
Right.
So that's kind of a good overview of what someone should do when they're brand new to NetSuite as a beginner. What about someone that's a power user? If you were at Suite World or a big conference or online or a LinkedIn group for NetSuite power users. Maybe you were one-upping each other. Hey, Daphne, have you ever seen this before? Or maybe you had the ear of a product manager at NetSuite and you were sharing kind of war stories of some of the really complicated things you've worked through. What are your favorite tips for a power user who's been using NetSuite for several years?
So one of my favorite tips is that now that you understand NetSuite, and you're a power user, I would look at your processes and consider some workflows. So I usually recommend that you go with NetSuite basic functionality when you implement, but then once your team starts really moving and getting faster, then that power user can look at those processes and create workflows to actually speed up things that are repetitious, right? So there's point and click workflow wizards that power user can use, and they wouldn't necessarily have to have a developer to help them. Using the power of the searches and the analyzing of the data and recognizing that NetSuite is a single database, which makes the analytics much easier out of the box. So really understand the power of those searches. And then really consider having those sandboxes. So NetSuite allows you to have as many sandboxes as you want, and you can push that production refresh to those sandboxes. And that way you can test new solutions. So those workflows you create, you could test those in the sandbox before you push them to production. That would be really helpful to use that sandbox for that capability.
So got the process driving the workflows, the searches driving analytics, and then using the sandbox, the unlimited sandbox capabilities to test as you're rolling up into production.
Yes.
Does this vary much depending on the kind of business? I know you mentioned manufacturing, and you mentioned you've worked with a lot of software, with a lot of SaaS companies. Do any of these, in terms of setting up workflows, in terms of these searches or analytics, vary depending on the vertical market, the kind of client that you're working with?
Well, of course, depending on what process you want to streamline and align, the workflow would vary, but the actual process of creating the workflow would not vary. It would still be the same functionality in NetSuite. It would just have changes based on the industry.
So we talked about beginners, we talked about the advanced power user. When you think about all of the NetSuite users and consultants you've come across over the years, do you find that there's a pattern of common mistakes that a lot of people are making that you'd like to be able to save them from, given that much thought?
So I find the best organized projects are businesses that have created their use cases and really thought about those use cases before they started implementing. And they also have that stakeholder in the business that really helps drive that implementation and has the buy-in. I'm just finding that the clients that do that are so much more organized in that implementation, and their users feel more confident that they're going to get that solution to do their job, and they're going to have solid test cases when they implement. I also suggest that they keep it at first during the implementation as basic as they can, and then build on that after they're solid making it through that implementation, and after they see that their users are getting faster, maybe 2 months after the implementation. And then one more thing I have is that clients should really understand the allocation of the resources to that project, and when they allocate people to the project, that they understand that they're not going to be able to do their full job that they were originally doing, that they're going to need time to work on.
So it sounds like there's 3 big mistakes to avoid. And the first one is really making sure that you've thought through the use cases and really the second part of that is making sure that you have strong enough buy-in with the right stakeholders in the organization, ideally the right kind of executive sponsor, to make sure that it doesn't get stuck just on lack of buy-in. The second thing, really make sure that you start with really basic steps during the implementation. Allow a good few months, mostly for the users that you're supporting to get up to speed and absorb the new system.
Right. And so when you can go NetSuite basic, but understand the power of NetSuite. So like if I want to change one thing on a customer record, on every customer record, all I need to do in NetSuite is push a button and it updates all the records for those customers. So even though you're keeping it NetSuite basic, understand that there still is the power of NetSuite, but don't go all crazy with scripts and workflows and special processes. Look at NetSuite basic functionality and add the fanciness later if you find you need it. But I'm finding that if clients keep it basic, it's working for a lot of different industries.
And then the third mistake you said is a lot of people are not allocating the right amount of resources to the project, and just it's an expectations management challenge.
Yes.
Okay.
Just calling it out at the beginning, you're going to spend 75% doing your job and 25% to the project, and then, calculating those resources to the project.
So in other words, if somebody is counting on continuing to do their job as a cost accountant, they need to make sure that they can only handle about 75 to 80% of the normal workload, because if they're not giving you a day and a half a week for the project, it's not going to move forward.
Right, exactly.
So the final area I want to take a few minutes to discuss is your thoughts on where the industry is headed, where the accounting industry is headed, where the ERP industry is headed, where NetSuite is headed. What do you think is going to change in the next 6, 12, 24 months down the road that's going to have a really profound impact on how companies are using NetSuite, that the typical users and implementations are engaging with RSM US and how they get over the finish line and get up and running with NetSuite?
Right. So, our environment's changed a lot the last 4 or 5 months, and I'm finding that the clients are wanting more efficiency and actual advisory, and sometimes they are doing that configuration work, but we are advising them for services and technology because, we've been a longtime partner to them, and they're finding that, we can help them through this trying time right now. I guess mainly it's, being that partner, but also helping them be more efficient. And with RSM, we do a monthly newsletter and we do educational webcasts that our clients can join and learn more about NetSuite. There are many changing rules with revenue and leasing, and we help educate them. And NetSuite seems to keep up with the updates and technology and changes in accounting rules. And so we just help them navigate that through these newsletters and educational tools. And that's the beauty of the cloud too, is, they can use NetSuite anywhere they are in the world, and we can get on these web tools and have discussions with them face to face. I'm just finding more advisory services.
Do you think that's the general trend, is that clients are going to be looking to do more of the basic configuration themselves, and lean on a partner like RSM US more for the advisory work that layers on top of that? Right.
The advisory work and technology piece, and advising them through that change they're trying to make is where I'm seeing the trend.
Would you see RSM US playing a continued role in training with the clients too, or are they getting that mostly direct from NetSuite?
I do a lot of training, and I do, maybe they want to be more efficient in one area, or they want to add a module on. We have a client wants to add a Dunning module. So, when they add a new, maybe they want to add fixed assets, then we'll reach out and train them on fixed assets. We'll also hand them a desktop reference for a resource, but we'll take them through probably a 1 or 2 hour session to really get them hands-on. And that doesn't need to be on site. We've done it, in these Zoom meetings, WebExes. I find that it's super helpful for them just to get a jump start on that process.
So you see kind of that ad hoc, highly customized training as still being an essential part of delivering the overall advisory services.
Yes, I do.
Great. This has been terrific to get your thoughts on what beginners should think about with dashboards and color coding and using the help to get the right answers out of the gate, and what experts should be thinking about with process and workflows and looking to get rid of repetitious work and the searches and pulling together with the analytics. And the sandbox sounds like something, especially in an enterprise implementation, that's super critical. And yeah, if somebody's got a lot of tabs open, it sounds like a no-brainer to have it color-coded so you don't get confused.
Exactly, yes.
And there's the basic mistakes of making sure people plan the right time and get the right stakeholders involved, and
yes.
Aren't going crazy out of the gate with too many bells and whistles that could complicate basic adoption. This has all been terrific. Daphne, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today to get our viewers and our listeners up to speed on the basics of NetSuite. If somebody has any questions or wants to follow what you're up to, are you active on social media? Is there a good way for somebody to keep in touch?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, Daphne Peterson, and rsmus.com. They can also reach me there. And if they need help on NetSuite, anywhere on the internet, you can type RSM NetSuite and find us. We have lots of good blogs. rsmus.com.
Excellent. Yeah, education is such a big piece of getting this correct. And yeah, I've noticed, I follow RSM US on LinkedIn. I noticed that you've had a lot of really good webinars, and I'm sure that's a really important piece of making sure that you stay visible and attract kind of like-minded clients, giving them the right tools to succeed. Part of the reason we do podcasting too. But yeah, Daphne, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Thanks again.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you, Joshua.
You're very welcome. Stay safe now.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the AI in Accounting podcast. To subscribe and leave a review, check us out at blog.vic.ai or wherever you like to consume podcast episodes, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.